go ahead and do a quick round of introductions. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. I'll do an introduction to myself, and we'll walk through a few topics. So very excited to be here, and I think we should start with Megan, because she's first on the list.
Great. Thank you, Narinder. Megan Scrotenboer. I am with Hakoda as the Client Service Director, and prior to coming over to Hakoda, I was with Corewell Health for about 10 years, just shy of a decade. And Dustin talked yesterday about organizations being in a liquid or a solid phase. And it was the beginning of a very liquid phase for Corewell, then Spectrum Health. We're a payvider, and so we also have a payer entity, and my experience spread across information security, the payer organization named Priority Health, and then leading the integrated data and analytics strategy as a client of Snowflake.
Hi all, my name is Kingston Mann. I'm a principal data scientist at City of Hope. I've been there just about for 4 years now, and I have the benefit really of ignorance in healthcare. And I just see all these things that seem ridiculous to an outsider. And prior to that, I was a research professor in neuroscience of all things at USC. So the through line there is just applying AI and machine learning, sometimes brain-based AI, to address really low-hanging fruit that you can see in brain research, NASA JPL, I did a stint, and now in healthcare and cancer.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm Mickey Bansell. I've been trying to figure out this intro, and some of my newfound friends last night helped me figure this out. So I like Honey Nut Cheerios. And the reason I say this is because I think we define ourselves, I'm going through this mindfulness and gratefulness phrase, we define ourselves so much by what we have done, right? And I can tell you that this has been an amazing conference. I've met so many amazing people that bring such a vast amount of experience, expertise, and honestly, just compassion to solving sometimes what it feels like unsolvable problems, right? So with that being said, I'm clinically a pediatric emergency physician and transitioned from after 13 years of doing that. During that time, I've also worked in quality and safety for the past 15 to 16 years now. That is my passion, is safety. And as part of the intro, I'll say that the list that we had earlier, right, none of the bullet points of what is the future of healthcare and in 2035, what will it look like? You know, Rod should have left here with a mic drop, loved the talk, because in the end, none of those bullet points spoke to patient safety.
Narinder Singh, my journey into healthcare also came about in a different way. I was a technologist. I started a company that was Salesforce's first investment in cloud computing, walked through that change, and decided to transition into healthcare, went back to school, did a master's in translational medicine at UCSF, and my focus was on alarm fatigue in the hospital. And then it became very real for me because my mom had interstitial lung disease. We went into the hospital, and she developed ARDS. And so all of a sudden, they're like, she's not going to leave. She was intubated 2 days later, and that began a 12-week inpatient journey where she culminated in ECMO and a bilateral lung transplant. And so I spent 1,000 hours in her ICU room on the floor of the hospital watching the miracle of medicine. Literally, we can take over the function of a heart and lungs. And then I watched how poorly technology served the actual process of care. And so I started thinking about, like, why can't Meg, my favorite nurse, be with my mom all the time? And then I started thinking about, well, why can't Meg be with everyone's mom all the time? And so I started a company called LookDeep that focuses on using computer vision and AI to watch patients at every moment of this sensitive journey that they have. From things like, are they trying to get out of bed? Do they have a restless night? And the idea is that helping nurses and doctors be ever present for every patient, even though they can only be in the room a few minutes a day in the case of a doctor, or a few hours a shift in the case of a nurse. And so really trying to think about that lens of how that can happen, and then naively jumped into the hardest part of healthcare, which is hospitals and change. So I'm gonna tee us up for a second with just a couple macro things of the emergency of why and why now. We saw this a little bit with COVID, but really just like acuity in hospitals is going up, the population is aging. About 50% growth in people over 65 in the next 20 years. You can just do the math. We are boiling the frog. We have staffing that's flat or declining. We have a population that's aging, i.e. more acute patients. We need something that'll bend the cost curve of care. Otherwise, we're going to constantly deliver less and less valuable care each year. And so that is the macro of what we're looking at. And this is not a problem for 20 years from now. You can see the signs of this. Pressure on financials of hospitals, nurse burnout, retention in the field, doctor understaffing and not being able to meet capacity. So we're seeing the cracks in the system now, and really we started to see them at COVID. And the thing I would say as we jump into the panel here is I think the crisis can create opportunity. In San Francisco, the Loma Prieta earthquake was a tragedy, but it basically destroyed a freeway that overhung all of downtown that we never would have had the will to change and take down. And it really set the stage for revitalizing what downtown San Francisco was for the next 100 years. And so if we don't take the emergencies of COVID and the opportunities of AI, what are we kind of doing, right? And I think to Mickey's point, I'm going to start back to the patient. And I want to start with a personal experience that's not mine, but is Megan's. So Megan, maybe you can start us off.
Thank you. And I share this less for shock value and more because it truly is a use case that cuts across all the parts of the care continuum and represents opportunities to engage with AI. So the teen with a TBI is me, and that is what is left of my Oldsmobile Alero in 2005. And this is a great example of touching all aspects of transfers from EMT to the ED to the ICU, where I was there for a week with a full-time sitter, and to inpatient, and then to rehabilitation. And I want to double-click on rehabilitation because I think it's the place where it offers the most direct value to the patient. And Raj showed earlier the engagement with your smartwatch. This is akin to health tech that helps patients heal faster and also engage with their care rather than having it be a point solution. So I remember the moment that I identified my baseline after I was discharged from rehab. And back then, we didn't have text messaging. We would get on AOL Instant Messenger and talk to our friends. And I was eager to be a normal kid again. I had been in the dark for 8 weeks or longer, and I got on, and deluge of messages like, oh my gosh, you're back, what are you doing? And I remember trying to respond to them and recognizing that I could not form a coherent sentence. And I'd been told that, but I didn't actually see that come to be in my real life until I started trying to live in a normal way. And so at that time, treatment was a barrage of paperwork and meeting with a psychologist for hours and going back for scans. And there was no continuous way to understand if you were doing better. It was basically your own assessment, like, oh, great, I'm not falling down when I stand up anymore consistently. I have good days. I have bad days. Okay, I have more good days than I have bad days now. And so the outcome of feedback and the ability to then engage in that way is really important. So I saw a stat that it's estimated 69 million patients in the US have traumatic brain injuries. And also ironic, this was almost 20 years ago, but in the past 20 years, we've made tons of strides on understanding and educating the public on traumatic brain injuries, how they get them. It's not always blunt trauma that causes them, and what are the long-term and lasting effects. So I'm really encouraged by the academic medical centers and health tech companies that are making strides with traumatic brain injuries. Like Stanford is looking at different models so that they can understand why are some brain injuries have lasting damage and others don't. It's experimental right now, but it's something better than what we had 20 years ago. University of Arizona is using VR to assess traumatic brain injury in veterans. And their TBI can be different in that noise can cause brain vessels to pop and cause a form of TBI. And that's a 25-minute process versus the hour-long, multi-day process that I went through back in 2005. There's another health tech company called Continuous Therapy, and they created an app that allows the patient to engage with their care plan. So where I used to go to a half hour north to Grand Rapids to a rehab center, do these exercises and then come home and not do anything until the next time I went there. This puts the accountability in the patient's hands, where they can then see, the progress and engage with it in a way that makes sense to them. And I think we know that innovation happens in a niche, but it doesn't have to happen in a silo. And there's a lot of different health centers doing things for traumatic brain injuries, and this would be an awesome chance to all collaborate and deliver actual value to a motivated set of patients, because when it's your brain, you care about it. And so that, I think when we talk about ROI to patients and then prioritization, you have a large population who suffers potentially from the same condition. The ROI could be potentially priceless.
Mickey, I want to zoom out to something that you said in one of our conversations on kind of from centering on the patient to the kind of overall journey, the ontological journey of AI in providing for patients at different steps. How have you used that as a framework to try to guide what AI initiatives make sense when to slot into actually creating a holistic plan for change?
Yeah, and I think that I like how you worded it as holistic, right? So we saw the slide yesterday, 2,000 plus solutions. In another 6 months, it's probably logarithmically going to increase, right? And so the key thing is, how do we create a vision where there's a semantic layer on top of the data stack with all of these other solutions, but it speaks to the patient at the center? Be it the financial data or claims data, be it the medical data, but in the end, we have to tie it back to the patient on a layer that is basically quality and safety.
Are there things that you have done with your system or day-to-day to kind of begin the first steps of that?
Yeah, so I think that I'll give an example. So in terms of predictive modeling, Epic has several, Victor mentioned cognitive computing yesterday. Epic has really expanded their cognitive computing platform, and one of their models is end of life, right? And I would think that when you look at it, what it does is it looks at mortality risk over the next 1 year for inpatients. So looking at high risk for mortality, right? And so it's palliative medicine that we partnered with, of all people, right? And palliative medicine, most physicians and most physicians don't want to consult palliative medicine. They think it's truly end-of-life care. But when you, again, go back to that term of holistic patient care, what we were able to do when we piloted it and then implemented it house-wide is we're seeing an increase in number of palliative care consults, but the amazing thing is it's actually resulting in better patient and family experience, reduced length of stay, and reduced mortality.
So I think one of the things that I know it's so convenient to say, hey, it's about putting the patient at the center. And I think, at least in the hospital, my experience has been like the best way to improve the patient's outcomes is to improve the outcomes of the nurses and doctors that care for them. It's like the first line. Kingston, I want to talk about an initiative that you guys have went through to actually help with that, helping providers provide the care for patients. Maybe you can walk through what you guys have done.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Narinder. Also, Megan, I wanted to bring up that my former colleague at USC is using VR for traumatic brain injury, and they're collaborating with the VA hospital, where, of course, TBI is a huge issue among veterans, and thank you for sharing your story, too. But that's my past life. But Narinder, to address your question about this kind of holistic view of my own customers are the doctors and the clinicians. It's not the patients. And Mickey, you brought up the point of having a level of compassion and empathy. And in my role as a data scientist, it's really more of a customer service role. I'm serving the clinicians and really trying to understand what their pain points are. And that's how you earn their trust, by bringing that level of empathy and compassion for what is burning them out. What is the stupid thing that you guys are doing that you wish you didn't have to do? So we've also had some failures in the past because we would build tools that nobody asked for, nobody wants to use, because it's yet another thing piled on top. So what we have built now, I think, is seeing a measure of success. We're so excited about this. I wonder if anybody will mention LLMs during this week. But so we built our own. It's called Hope LLM. And it's really to remove a lot of this friction and unlock the huge amount of value that is locked away into the clinical notes database. It's just gathering dust on our SQL servers, right? How can we mine this for insights? And of course, this has been a very long goal. People know there's a lot of value in there. So really just about 14 months ago or so, since GPT-4 dropped, everything has changed for us, and we've dropped everything and ran straight into this problem and this application space. All of those bullets for a vision for 2035, I think 2 years ago I would have said, way too ambitious, and now it's completely flipped. They're not ambitious enough because of all the unlocks enabled by LLMs. So things we can do now include summarization, question answering, data abstraction, clinical trial matching, all unlocked by a single framework of Hope LLM. And not to plug it too much, but I do believe it's a unique solution in the market that is very populated now with lots of LLMs. And even for medicine, it's a very crowded space with a lot of startups. What differentiates us is that there's a difference between general medicine LLMs, for which there are good public data sources, and then a cancer-specific, cancer-specializing LLM, which can only be trained with a large proprietary data set. And of course, healthcare organizations are loath to share this, if not only for the PHI issues, but also because this is their lifeblood, their data that was expensively collected. Hospitals have to be stewards and protectors of this data. So as an insider, this is where the build makes sense instead of buying. We are able to take billions of clinical tokens of text on cancer-specific applications and then train our own retrieval model that can then send off to our latest LLM du jour, GPT-4 or GPT-5 when it comes. So we build in this modular way to then address all those specific pain points that doctors face.
Good.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think great points, Kingston. Speaking of LLMs, I like how you said we have these general medicine-based ones, right? But the specialty ones, and Rod mentioned medical errors, which is one of my passions in preventing. And so, for example, just in terms of, many of you may have heard, I think it was Florida, where a surgeon, instead of removing a liver, removed a spleen, right? And so, in the past 15 years, I know off the top of my head, I've gone through about 6 or 7 RCAs where laterality was incorrect, right? And so one of the things that healthcare, we're always 20 years behind everyone, the pilot checklist, right? So we talk about the timeout prior to procedures. Imagine an ambient AI, and I have yet to see this, that is listening to the timeout happen or warning that a timeout has not happened, and everybody stop. Love the fact the nurses are like, yes, please, right? But listening to that timeout, something as simple as that, and saying, well, a RAG-based model that says, well, based on what the procedure or the HPI for the procedure is supposed to be, you are saying the right kidney and not the left kidney. Are we all on the same page? And take that manual, sign off on the left leg versus right leg, and actually do validation checks. I think that's where we also need to head.
Stage one of panels is everybody's nice to each other, and many times they get stuck there. And I promised the panel today that I would not let us get stuck there. And so, we'll hopefully have some active disagreement with the room, but let me start off so it's great. You guys got this great cancer LLM, UpToDate's got their new LLM, and then Epic comes out with them. How is this not going to be spaghetti and overwhelming in the same pattern, but just with better tech in 6 months? Do you see a way out of that?
That's the crux of the American healthcare system. We're so siloed, right? 2,000 companies, right? 2,000 solutions, 10,000 in the next 6 months, right? And I will challenge that more so with, we know there's going to be 10,000 LLMs, but what I would hope for is that how do we get these solutions scalable enough that we know 50% of hospitals in this country are less than 100 beds. We were talking about this yesterday. So how do we make these scalable? How do we get the cancer LLM to the Podunk Hospital in South Georgia that really needs it, that really, really needs it? And that's what we should also be solving for.
So would you A/B test these things? Would you pick one and stick with it? Like, translate that into something concrete that everybody should take away. And you can give, like, you can be the Gartner, like 63% probability you should do this. I'll give you that as an out.
Yeah, I think that it's going to have to come down to tying these LLMs through interoperability with the EHR. We know that from all the CARES Act, everything, that the hospitals have the EHRs. So we have to be able to figure out kind of what is the best optimization model that works with those EHRs.
Rod's like, I cannot let that go.
When you're developing this, which is really cool, I'm curious, you take it all the way back, and maybe it was a multifactorial conversation, multifaceted conversation, but did somebody say, we need to develop an LLM, and then we're going to sell it? Or did they say, we need to develop an LLM to solve a clinical problem, and we're going to only keep it in-house? Or, because I think, and we see this everywhere, even when we were talking about this registry project that I described, there were 3 academic medical centers who said, we won't work with you unless you give us part of the IP, which is a stopping point. So I'm curious, when you were having the conversations on this, how did that evolve?
Sure. So to respond to this skepticism, I do think this time is different, and maybe that's my naivete speaking, new here. I think the hype is absolutely justified, finally, within the past year. So to answer your question, Rod, nobody asked us for an LLM. We had the time and space and the freedom among our team to tinker with LLMs. So first, we built another language model-based solution to predict progression. It died. Nobody used it because we were using the previous generation of LLMs. So it fed into a classification model, and then it would output some probability. Who cares, right? But that actually came from discussions with providers who were spending 2 days to do this task per patient, paying a very expensive CRC to do it. Now, with the new LLM-based solution, it takes 20 minutes, and that includes the human reviewing all of its outputs against the cited source material. So using that method, we've eliminated hallucinations. I think that hallucination problem gets too much play because it's solvable, eminently solvable. But it's like an interesting word, I suppose. It's evocative.
We're going to dive a little deeper into this, but before we get into these pieces, I want to actually shift gears for a second, because I had said that we can talk about a theoretical conversation. I want to try to focus a lot of our conversation on the next 12 months, like, so we can get some concrete pieces. And, look, this is ultimately what we're trying to do, right? Better care, lower cost. I'm going to give one example of that, because I think when you come from outside of healthcare, you start and you're like, we're going to make patients' lives better. And you discover it's like I have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and you learn to wrap the vegetables in rice or ketchup. And I think for hospitals and healthcare in general, it has to be wrapped, the rice is the financial benefit, and the vegetable is actual patient benefit. And I wish it wasn't that way, but that's the life that we live in. So for example, this is one piece of something that we work on. Like today, virtual sitters monitor about 3 to 5% of patients inside of hospitals. This technology has existed for a decade. But half the hospital is high risk for falls right now. It doesn't really make that much sense. Like, why are we monitoring such a small portion? The answer is clearly money, right? And so the idea is that if you can start to use AI to kind of assist a person to say, hey, this is an area of safety that's okay, this is not an area of safety, we can supersize the capability of a person to watch more people, we're going to lower the cost of delivery of that care. And I think the challenge is today you have to do that without changing the failure rate. I think there was an early part of the panel, how much faster could we do if we change the failure rate a little bit? How much would it change the cost and profile? So coming back to this question, for each of you, give some advice to folks who are going to take home and say, where should they start in order to kind of make this curve work in their advantage so that they can get to the vegetables of better patient outcomes, but starting with kind of financial impacts that are nearer to what hospitals and healthcare systems need to deliver on to kind of sustain themselves.
I can go first. Okay. Well, I think especially
12 months.
12 months. Okay. So since in the next 12 months, most providers will still be in fee-for-service models, primarily. That stands to reason. The more you can differentiate yourself with a competitive advantage that serves a large population, that drives traffic. So people know where to go, the hospital that has the best brain center, right? whatever it be. So collaborating in a way that you can put that and marketing that new feature out in front, and that drives more traffic to your facility in a basic way.
Kingston, so Megan says to pull more patients. Why is she wrong? Give us, no, I'm kidding. Give us your, what would be your take on that?
Where do I begin? No.
I'm not quite that aggressive.
So I think in this kind of timeline, 6 to 12 months already,
Yep.
we can actually get to addressing the Podunk Hospital, but all the community care centers. We can roll out technology, and I mean what you're building with LookDeep is this is the beauty of software-based solutions. You can scale in that way, and it also came up clinical trial matching. How do we make trials available to patients who are far away from the academic medical center? What if you can, in real time, poll every single patient against every single enrolling trial of interest across the nation? That is a possibility now, and we're scaling to that.
So let me push back a little bit, not for just theater, but so I work with rural hospitals a lot, and I'll give you a story of two of them. One of them we rolled out into, and we started watching every high-risk patient for falls. They had a huge impact. And immediately the system was like, let's do that at all of the hospitals. And they're like, well, we don't have Wi-Fi and the rooms are not wired. Similarly, on the second point is like we have a lot of places where I can't even get to the data. There's silos across that. Do you think to get to these in your system or more broadly, do you think we have infrastructure work to do that will allow us to get to these kind of AI-driven pieces? Or do you think we can go straight to the AI-driven pieces? How do we shortcut that? Or is it there is no shortcut?
Just respond. So can we build a coalition, or like City of Hope did? Can you buy a coalition, right? Can you just buy cancer care centers, cancer treatment centers of America, and all of a sudden have a national footprint into Chicago, Atlanta, Phoenix, where before we were just SoCal? So that's one way. Then you put everybody onto the same Epic backend database, and we have all these patient records now, and we can run that. So if you're going to do it piecemeal, I agree that is still unsolved.
I like it. M&A is the ultimate collaboration entity. It's not, I mean, I'm not saying it laughing. It's like it's the one that's proven, right? Like you can actually drive. Mickey, over to you. Say same question on the 12 months. What do you do to get your system to have, say, early ROI success with some of these cutting edge capabilities around AI and more?
Yeah, no, I'll throw it back at you in that visual ambient AI, right? So been around for a while, and you're doing some really cool stuff. I was talking to two people this morning, so I'll bring up 2 points. One is in terms of reducing cost, I equate it to improving reimbursement. Yep. So the amount of money hospitals lose to surgical site infections, and one of the main causes of surgical site infections, my SPD, again, RCAs galore on just the bioburden that we have. Visual AI being able to detect bioburden, it's an easily solvable solution, right? And reimbursement's going to improve your cost basis. I think that we have to head in that direction, that when we come in with a 6 to 12 month solution, AI is a tool that is part of your data strategy. AI is not a strategy. But with that tool that's used in your data strategy, how do you apply it in the last mile? And there's just different use case scenarios that actually you have to drill into each use case scenario to be able to define what your ROI is, because it may not just be CapEx and OpEx. It's going to be, well, for surgical site infections, how many SSIs have we had last year? And it's increasing at some of our facilities, and we know the reason why.
So I'm going to turn this to an adjacent point around platforms, because a lot of times the challenge is each innovation has a cost to it, an activation cost. And if the activation cost is the same for each innovation, that's why nothing gets done. Like, so for example, like, you don't want to have to put a new video camera in each room to get 6 different solutions. You want a platform that can ambiently sense collectively and plug into that. Should hospitals, health systems, providers pick their bets? Like, should we say, you know what, I don't really care, I'm going to go all Google or all Amazon or all Microsoft, not because I think they're the best in every category, but because the friction of doing multiple experiments is too high. If you guys are going back to your health systems or to these folks, would you say, look, we should at least, what balance of experimentation and diversity versus standardization to reduce the cost of new innovation activation should health systems be thinking about, or life sciences providers or others?
Well, if you talk about a hardware solution and you need to install cameras, I think that will be a significant activation energy required.
We're little fish. Go to my platform story, Google, Microsoft,
Yeah.
Amazon, all the big boys. They all want your business. Should you be thinking about working with all of them, or should you say, look, it's just too hard? Like we need to create speed by reducing the friction, at least on that dimension.
We're trying to work with all of them. So we are an Azure-based shop, and we're using, we had very early and direct access to OpenAI APIs. But, we're agnostic, actually. So we're trying to get in place a Google BAA and to get onto Vertex and the Gemini class of models, which unlock new abilities. But I've been trying for 8 months to fight across the bureaucracy and the compliance and the legal review and this and that, and we're still waiting. So like the tech is already there, but that incredible activation, the procedures there, were shocking to me.
Megan?
Oh, can I just add to that? So internally, I was in information security at the beginning of COVID, and that's when we needed new technology, really fast, like doctors asking, can we use WhatsApp to talk to her? And the way that we handled the speed of the business and the slowness, the inherent slowness and thinking time and information security and compliance was to install internal consulting groups that were internal to InfoSec, they were point of contact at the elbow for the business, working through these problems. You're not just throwing a ticket in to solve for these things. So externally, but also internally, those underlying, rocks that are holding you back from progress.
Megan, you touch upon a good point. I think and that this was discussed yesterday, and you and I have discussed this a lot lately, is having that champion, right? So everything moves like molasses. So we're Azure shop as well, and we've been modernizing our data stack, to Snowflake, and everybody knows the value add, but without that champion, whichever realm it's in, that operational or clinical champion, it is very hard to get things to move.
So what's a mistake that you see, not your systems or places, but other people making when they're thinking about financial ROI inside of the hospital, particularly as trying to apply it to this technology that's moving at a pace we haven't seen before?
I have an example of a mistake I'm seeing out there in the LLM space, which is, say you had a bunch of cancer clinical text. Why don't we train our own foundational LLM to generate more cancer text? And I think that is a short-sighted approach, because any day now GPT-5 will drop, and the next Anthropic, and so on will come, and it will obsolete your very expensive investment. And I think we need to be building, you hate to call it that, but just wrappers around these. And that actually obscures the level of complexity and detail of your wrapper. But I'm happy to call it that, because then it becomes a modular solution. So I don't think we should try to be competing against foundational model providers. We should be working with them and doing our best to get those BAs in place, finally, please. But then, we've built, you need to identify your value add, and it is somehow unlocking your proprietary data.
Yeah, because even if you double or triple your team, it's a drop in the bucket, right? And what's happening. So, all right, others? Other advice, mistakes you see other organizations making?
I think it goes back to the last point, and several other individuals have spoken to it, is that not having a multidisciplinary team, not having the right stakeholders at the table. And to be able to identify those is you need to know where the value happens, right? Do the Gemba, be at the bedside. There's so many solutions that are just built. I can go through numerous Epic Radar dashboards, and I'll go up to my chief nursing officer and say, did you know that question you asked me yesterday? You have a CNO dashboard in Epic. Never knew that existed.
Let me ask a question for you and others. So I agree, right? But spending 1,000 hours in the hospital, I'll tell you one thing. The doctor walks into the room, it's a completely different room. So for 23 and a half hours a day, it works one way. It's probably more like 23 hours and 45 minutes a day, it works like one way. And for the other 15 minutes, it works a different way. And so how do you, your physician, you guys are the center of care in many ways, right? Certainly decision-making power. How do you make sure you've got a context for, it's not, Daniel Kahneman, famous book, Thinking Fast and Slow, has what you see is all there is. How do you avoid that personally, and how do you get systems to avoid that?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's, again, goes back to the identifying the appropriate stakeholders. If I'm putting through a protocol and we know we protocolize everything in healthcare. If I'm putting through a protocol and I have not spoken to my nurses and brought the nurses to the table, if you're not at the table, you're going to be eating for dinner. And so if my nurses are not at that table with me, those other 23 hours and 45 minutes are going to be totally different than when I'm in that room with that patient. You got to standardize the work.
And I think that's one of the few benefits of COVID. I think that there's definitely more voice in the nursing stakeholders now than there has been because of that. We'll move. I thought this would be all original, but Rod already kind of hit this. So, but he kind of gave an unsatisfying answer because there's no satisfying answer. So, you can almost imagine. So, my left side bot is the insurance bot that says no all the time, right? And the right side bot is my prior auth bot that says yes all the time. And this was teed up already, but I see a real danger here is that how does this not suck all the oxygen out of the room of the innovation piece? Because I don't see how. I think we have a prisoner's dilemma where we can't get through this. And so I'm really struggling with how that goes through. And so 2 questions. One, do you see a way out of that? Or second, if that's inevitable, how do you turn the forces of darkness you have to invest in into something good that creates infrastructure for the parts that we all wanted to work on, which is around the care pieces?
So here's where I want to push back, actually.
Yeah,
I think the
I want to be wrong here.
I think you are, because I think the arms race analogy is incorrect. It's inapt here because arms races can escalate, ad infinitum. There's no limit to the size of a bomb you can build. But with an LLM dueling against another one, there is a foundational source of truth, which is what the patient needs and is justified in receiving. So I think you can get there more quickly if you have these very rapidly debating LLMs to get to the truth.
All right. Disagreement is fun, so we're going to disagree. I think you're accelerating a poorly operating set of incentives is unlikely to result in all of a sudden better situation. Because who adjudicates that final decision? We speed up the LLMs, and now they've generated 7,000 pages of documentation for a human to finally decide, is this actually an approved procedure or a reimbursed X? How does that not where that destination ends up?
Because their determinations must all be justified. They need to point to some line in the contract that justifies their claim or their denial. So when the opposing LLM then receives this justification, it can then either justify its response or it needs to accept the reality of it. So we're still in the early stages of this duel, which is why it seems so intractable. But I think as it gets better, again, this is the worst it'll ever be. As it gets better, that acceleration towards the ground truth will happen.
It's the worst the AI will ever be, right? So I'll let anybody in the panel answer, but I'm sure there's somebody in the room who's an expert on one side of these. And so I would love, anybody want to jump up and take a strong position on either side of this based on what you're seeing in your organizations and how this has worked even in the pre-AI world. Yes.
So I'm going to kind of take it in a slightly different angle, but I worked in, Megan and I worked in the same integrated health system, and that battle of always saying yes and always saying no is absolutely real. I would say finding common ground. So let's just say, by example, cost-effective preventive care, okay? Like, no one debates that. From the payer side, it's like, okay, so cancer screenings, for example, those certain ones are cost-effective. Payers can buy into them, you can, stratify smartly to make sure it's not just everyone who's a male or female and over a certain age. You could, refine it a bit, but my point is, like, carve out and find the common ground in the patient population where there is agreement and there is research that shows, yes, we want to do this. And I just wonder, you kind of lower your weapons at that point, right? Because you're like, okay, this makes sense, and then I think you can get somewhere. But that's just one example is and I preface cost-effective preventive care, because not all preventive care, honestly, in my opinion, doesn't make sense, but the cost-effective ones.
So point the weapons towards a direction that there's a common You know, even if we're going to use them to dig a hole in the ground, it's better than shooting each other with them, right? Other kind of, I'll start with others. Actually, oh, please.
I got an interesting, I don't know if this is my position, but a little you mentioned macro at the beginning, and I was thinking about this a little bit. If you're thinking about which one of those bots is going to win there, a bit anecdotal, but now looking and working with probably a couple dozen major health systems, and then maybe a dozen major payers, including even CMS. I see the payers move a little bit slower towards innovation, and so is there just a macro, like tidal wave where the providers maybe because of maybe the clinical innovation they're needing to do, where payers are just purely operational efficiency, could they just be a little bit behind in the race?
Who is, I'll take the other side of that, so I want to see what the audience thinks here. Show of hands, who thinks payers move faster than providers?
Okay.
All right. Who thinks providers move faster than payers? Kind of split in a lot of, not unwilling to go on record because there's a camera in the back. I think there's.
I accept your challenge to be provocative. I think this battle assumes that there is one absolute truth.
Yes.
And I think Laura kind of alluded to this yesterday, that payers have a different data set that they're working off of compared to the providers. And each can come to their own conclusions on what is the best care. And we're operating off of two disparate data sources, and both of us can be right until you actually do the experimentation. Like, there's this assumption that medicine is this hardcore engineering science, but we don't know really why our medications work or therapies work 50% of the time. We just that's what we've always done. So, who's to say anyone's right?
Thank you for supporting my doom and gloom position then. So one more, we'll shift, get back, I'll get to the panel. And, yeah.
I'll go a bit more optimistic.
Thank you.
This was really exciting for me yesterday, and I think Soil brought it up first. And now realizing today, repeating that this is a lot bigger. I didn't realize how much of a topic this was in this battle. But I'm not an expert necessarily on either side. What I do well though is think outside the box and think of alternative models. And this model represents the current model. And I think what it also represents is that because we see that this is a real problem, every problem is an opportunity as well. Not an opportunity necessarily for those planning, but the opportunity for a challenger to come in and disrupt and say, you know what, you guys are focusing on the wrong thing here. We all say that patient care is what matters. The patient does have an option. I can envision something where you have a third party, it's either the watchdog or even government coming in, or just a disruptor that comes in and takes advantage of the fact that this is going on and starts to steal market share because they can provide a different experience for the patient and focus on the right thing and use technology in a way that's completely different. And so I'm wondering for the panel, I don't know what they all are. I'm just thinking through the options here. What could be a threat to the current model if they don't figure this out?
Anybody want to start on that?
Yeah, I think that it was brought up earlier by Rod, is that, so the disruptor, I feel, is going to be changing the whole billing paradigm, right? Is coming in and looking at the way the clinical care is actually happening and not what's just being documented. So creating those efficiencies and then totally removing the aspect of, hey, pre-auth, this denials, whatever it may be, but coming in and totally disrupting the way the actual billing foundation is done.
So value-based care, which has been on the doorstep for a decade and a half. Maybe one shift to this, and I think we'll see some of this, like there's a lot of providers that are risk-taking insurers themselves, and that may be the first places that we see some innovation against this. Let's leave aside the debate on this piece and say, if there's going to be investments that are there, the CFO is going to say, hey, I got to invest or I don't. What are things that you would say structurally, and maybe we'll start with you, Kingston, is like, what are things that you're like, hey, these are foundational elements that you need to support any kind of generative infrastructure inside of hospitals. So let's at least use it to invest in that infrastructure that's common across financial use cases and patient care use cases.
Yeah, that's right. It is a common infrastructure that requires some visionary investment that I luckily walked into. So our chief digital officer and my executive director had the vision to build this kind of AI ML team to apply insights to our own needs. And we started really with the lowest hanging fruit that were the juiciest, which was the finance and ops and back end sides. So then you can do your classification models and do forecasting of income. You can do claim denial prediction and all of these dollars and cents problems. And then we bought ourselves the freedom and time and space to tinker with LLMs. And that is now paying off in spades. But if we were all occupied with more standard machine learning tasks all the time, if we were working at capacity all the time, we would have not had the space to make this investment so early on.
Other ideas, Vicky and Megan, in terms of infrastructure investments that we can say, yeah, we're going to do that, but we're going to invest in infrastructure that's going to serve a broader purpose, hopefully a more noble one.
I think starting with a full strategy, and you really need a leader with the intestinal fortitude or guts to say, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing it. And to your point about making the space, that really shifts the focus from engineers that are paying interest on tech debt that has been built up over a decade to we're going to solve these problems in this order, and then we're going to have the right SI, the right tool set, the right Google, like everything is going to fit together, and we're going to implement it in this order. And that, I think, saves 3 years off the journey to be able to tinker, I think.
Yeah, and again, technology is not the problem, right? So the foundation for building on LLMs, I'll take it away from thinking of it as an IT foundation, but more so, we already have the foundation. There is mandatory quality safety frameworks at every facility, right? So using that as a foundation to build on, it goes to speaking to the process because the technology is already there, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that's just sitting there in that framework.
It comes a little bit, that comes back to like what you hit at the beginning, this kind of ontological framework on top of the actual data structures that we have, which we previously haven't had a lot of incentive to invest in, right? It's kind of been opportunistic at certain, high capacity systems, but potentially maybe there is more of an incentive to invest in those now because of the fact that we can do so much more with that level of abstraction. I want to switch to the next topic here. So a lot of what we've talked about has been this left side, OpenAI, ChatGPT. Maybe I'm being a little defensive here, but there's another equally magical part of AI, which is, what's on the right side, the other side, or my left side? Does everybody recognize that? Yeah. Waymo, right? Also a magical experience, right? Like that people have finally we've kind of gotten to that, kind of this ambient sensing, et cetera. How do you think about, a little bit, again, the oxygen in the room problem of there's so much potential and speed with what we're doing with LLMs, and they're also like this almost there feeling. And then there's kind of infrastructure, old school machine learning and predictive models and ambient sensing. How do you think about managing that portfolio if you're a health system or a payer in kind of the journey to providing benefit collectively to the patients?
I'll say, I think the self-driving example is really great, actually, because you need, it's of course a life or death situation as well. Stakes are high, and the way you build the trust to shift this entire model, this huge lumbering model, is to run things in shadow mode in the beginning. And for example, a lot of Tesla cars, you don't even know that it's predicting how it would have reacted to your actual inputs. So once you gain all of that real world experience and shadow rollout, then you have earned the trust. You can point to the data of we would have avoided so many accidents that the human was involved in. That's exactly the model we're adopting. So once we've built it, we don't just shove it out there and let it start working. It's already running, and prospectively so. That is the best kind of evidence to give to a skeptical clinician. We spotted, you yourself have seen these errors or these overlooking certain things in your records. We saw those at the same time. It just wasn't turned on for you yet. Would you like to turn it on now?
I think these agents, however, need to talk to each other, right? So we're thinking of it as Waymo, as you and I in this self-driving vehicle. So if the agents don't speak to each other, if we don't plan it as such, we're going to have the failure that I was woken up for at 4:30 this morning, which was the fact that not necessarily visual AI, but our fall risk scoring methodology sends alerts to Epic Rover for our nurses, right? So when I go down a hallway in our hospital, one of the first things I asked is, who all's on fall risk when every fall risk flag is applied to the door? I mean, talk about alert fatigue. We've gone from the manual looking through charts to there's an alert fatigue happening with just a visual nudge. And now we're doing it in our EHRs, and now we're doing it at bedside in our phones. So the problem is that our nurses, for one specific patient, kept getting fall risk alerts. The stratification had not been done, and they missed the code alert that was also coming through. And that is a concern that I have when we have to responsibly implement these agents, and the agents then need to talk to each other.
It's a great piece. There was a comment before our discussion on, hey, this message was generated by ChatGPT. Low risk interaction, made even lower risk by the fact that there's something there, right? Whereas in this context, I think the self-driving car has a lot of lessons for us because of what Kingston was pointing out. And this is a situation where it's like it's been almost there for 10, 15 years, right? And so I think what's very clear is that we need a model that makes first-tier collaboration between the person and the AI. So it's not offensive, it's not taking decision-making agency away, and for all the 100 use cases. I sometimes will say that, it's going from having one person as a check to watch 100 people in falls or the like is 2 orders of magnitude easier than saying there's no person involved at all, right? And so I think this style of kind of human adoption from what we're seeing with ChatGPT and how you lower the bars there versus what you just described and we were going through is an important dichotomy. Are there others in terms of technology direction, technology investment in data that you say, hey, look, we're going to work on both of these categories, but the technology steps we take to prepare for those are very different in these cases? What are the distinctions from a guidance to the CIO or the like that you would say, as you're looking for health systems to experiment with these, that they need to take slightly different steps to enable the infrastructure for each?
So we are looking for other partners to roll out the tools that we validated internally for. And we've had success signing up a few, but some of the challenges we experienced were, again, like the stakeholder management. Like, are we coming in to replace all these jobs? No, we're not. And we couldn't. There is no such thing as the AI working on its own without the human oversight and the real human sign-off. AI cannot make medical decisions. Only people can do that. So part of that trust earning and empathy procedure was letting people know exactly how this will help you do your job and not try and make you redundant. And we show exactly the process, and we build that process with them in the loop. So I think that is how you always sell it as an assistive tool and not a replacement tool.
So there was a point in the audience made earlier that said, in the past, nurses have gotten this technology and it helps this much, and then you get this much more work. Mm-hmm. How do we, that sounds very similar to what we just walked through just now. How do we actually convince them that this is actually not the case this time? What would you do concretely to help put the guardrails in place so that this is an investment, not simply a matter of kind of squeezing even more out of folks, whether it's because of the documentation burden or nursing at the bedside?
So when I think of guardrails, right, and I think I'll combine both those two topics, these two questions, and this is what we're doing right now at our healthcare institution, is that I think that breaks are good. I don't think that it should be a dichotomy of all AI, no AI. So past life before medical school, I used to race motorcycles. When you're going around a curve, yeah.
Is that allowed?
Yeah.
Wow.
So, when you're actually going around a curve, you would think, right? Yeah. So the cool thing is that you apply your brake to actually shift the weight of a motorcycle going around a curve. You apply that rear brake 60 to 70% of the time. You're speeding up going through that curve by applying a brake and shifting weight on a bike. And I think that similarly to AI adoption, we can speed it up by slowing down and realizing, and we hear it all the time, it's built, if we put a process or a technology over a corrupt process, what are we going to get? Logarithmically corrupt outcomes, right? So I think that what we're working on together is making sure our data quality is right. Applying the brakes and making sure the data quality is right to then speed up future AI adoption. And I think that that's...
More vegetables. So hey, I was that more vegetables. We need more. I think there is like, you know, finding those incentive matches. Like, so for example, one of the things that we've looked at is like, there's like a lot of skepticism amongst nursing unions and AI for all the reasons that we just hinted to. But then there's also concern for like nurse safety at the bedside. So all of a sudden, if you can say, hey, AI is going to help watch you to make sure that you're not in a threatening situation, you all of a sudden have found an area where there's, you know, incredible resonance to say, I'm going to break through my disbelief or my paradigms because I can see the power of it helping me concretely. And so I think sometimes like we have to get to where we have investments in people even ahead of the ROI of those individual ones, because we're setting the stage for, just like data is, for future kind of capabilities. I want to,
So, Narinder, I wanted to follow up. So that's a great way to get buy-in from your nurses and your end users. But there's something I'm really still puzzled over, and maybe people can help us out here, which is the problem that the punishment for doing a good job is more work. So if you have all of this efficiency now, how do we sell that? We're just going to expect more, inevitably.
So I think there's a couple nurses in the room, right? So can I put you on the spot and say, all right, help us go back and, you know, it's been a little bit, like we talked about the problem. They've been kind of falsely promised in the past. How would you kind of, you know, make, not just put the right message in front of them, but actually create a structure that forces systems to do the right thing to support that so that trust is built up?
I think, again, it goes back to the evaluation. I think there are so many vendors in IT that take their product, they drop it off, and they say, now it's the problem of the organization's IT, good luck. Instead of both organizations partnering, and you go back. You go back 30 days later, you go back 60 days later, you continue that evaluation to say, is there something about our tool and our implementation that we did? If not, you can still be the voice of, hey, it seems like now you have a different problem. Great news, you solved for that outcome. Seems like you have a different problem. How can we help you again, just like we helped you last time? Because it is going to change. And I think we talk about this crazy concept of how do you standardize and streamline, but also customize and individualize. Like it's hard to repeat it again. I think Peter brought it up yesterday. If it works, you can't just box it up and take it to the very next place because everything is so different. But I think if you show the organization as a whole, we do care about the end user and the patient. We want to help. We have the tools to help. Let us help you. Instead of just saying, are you renewing this year? Great news, we're still here. We're still paid. That's all.
I want to follow up on that, but Mickey had something to say first. That's an amazing point that I want to transition to, but let's
I
go.
think it's just, in terms of contextually, being a pediatric emergency physician, I love my nurses. My nurses are awesome. They babysat me through residency, through fellowship, you know, and they know they are the heart of medicine, right? And I've never met a single nurse that goes in and says, I'm so looking forward to charting all day long. The work, the extra work they want to do is be at bedside and take care of that patient. That's why they got into nursing. That's why we became clinicians. So yeah, if the extra work is let's possibly end up seeing more patients and provide better care, but remove the boring, stupid stuff out of it, that's where I think our healthcare system is going to have a paradigm shift for the better.
You'll have more work, but you'll love it.
That's exactly right. That is true. People who are engaged, who are empowered, are willing to do more work and be happy. And I think it goes back to, as we're looking at all these technologies, like Simon Sinek said, start with why. If we're implementing AI because we don't want to be last, if we're implementing AI because the other CEOs at the roundtable last week said they were doing it, of course it's going to go badly. But if we're implementing AI after having talked to the nurses and after having talked to the physicians, and they say, this quarter of my job is non-value added, it is busy work, it is something that a machine could do, they will welcome the AI with open arms because it is solving a problem that they have. It's not a solution searching.
It's a bit of an interesting thing. I started, as everyone was describing this, and I'm not obviously a clinician, I've been in IT my whole life, but there's a shift in IT for folks like me in the room who came from being technical and then starting to add on people leadership. And you got to decide to make that jump, but what's hard is when you're in an area where you're doing both, and you're like, man, especially if you still kind of want to maybe go the technical route and you're not really sure, you're like, if I could just, I don't mind working 10, 12 hours solving this technical problem because I'm an engineer. But it's like, it's the people stuff that's draining me right now. So it's kind of like in the inverse here. It's like, I want to get rid of the,
Exactly.
I want to get rid of the technical stuff.
Heard,
that's
boss.
draining me. I just want to be with the people. So it's almost
Right.
like, we got to remember ourselves as IT nerds and introverts. It's like, it's the opposite of that, but that's what they're feeling.
So for the non-clinicians in the house, a book I would recommend is Patience Comes Second. Fantastic book.
So good transition, and I want to follow on that point. It's like, so when we were going through the cloud computing revolution, I remember, I think it was Benioff who said this, and I just stole it, which was like 80% of what you know is exactly the same, and 20% is completely wrong, and you got to switch. And I think the same thing applies to AI. There's some things that are obvious. I'm not going to let you say them, like people management, change management matters, collaboration, blah, blah, blah. What are some things that you're like, we used to do it this way, and we really need to do the opposite because of what's happening with the AI pieces? And I'll give you one, for example. I would, and this one is not proven to be right yet, but I couldn't agree more on the incentive alignment. And so I think about the SaaS model and the power of that being, we only do better if you're adopting it more, and it doesn't matter if our tech works great, but the outcomes are not there, you're not going to adopt it more. So therefore, that model should align our incentives, but still almost everything in healthcare is not sold that way. Right? So hopefully that one will come to be true at some point. On other directions, more internally facing, what are things that you suspect we have to do the opposite of what we have been doing to really unleash the power of the next generation of innovation related to some of the AI topics we've covered?
We need to move faster. It's
How?
outrageous to an outsider how slow we move. There's the lack of urgency is really, it aggravates me. I'm incensed by it because people are going through the worst, most painful periods of their lives, and we're sending 30 drafts of a contract back and forth. I can't abide by that, so I don't have the power to change it, though, but it needs to change.
Megan?
Can I ask a follow-up question? Why do you think that's happening? Like, what are, if you could name the top 2 things, like why?
I guess it's like not tech speed, it's not internet speed, it's healthcare speed, and tech is going to eat healthcare, but healthcare is not keeping up.
I think it's always been like that, right? So I remember my days as an intern at Lockheed and working on industrial engineering projects and Toyota manufacturing, initiatives. 20 years later in healthcare, for the past 4 years now, everybody wants to throw lean at a solution or at a problem, right? We're in healthcare, we're 20 years behind, and our priorities are not being determined by the actual frontline clinicians, but by administrators. Totally a different topic that we won't go down that rabbit hole in this conference, but in terms of healthcare IT adoption, I love it. We have to be agile. But like I said yesterday, we are stuck in a state of pilotitis.
So is that, give me some concrete ones. Stop pilots? Give me something that we should tell people to stop doing or do the opposite of now.
So there's a theory called Conway's Law, and it's that the architecture matches the organizational structure, the communication lines. And that's been very true for the large payer provider that I worked in, where really they were building, and it makes sense, they're building for their own context and their own world. And if it works, that's great, but that it still only works. It's not, it doesn't extend beyond that. And so it's having almost like a drive at the leadership level, looking at, are these where are the communication silos breaking down? And then you'll see almost as like a lagging effect, the rest of it, the architecture following.
Translate that into an action that you want people to do or stop doing.
Look at their org chart and say, does this make sense? What value are we producing here? And what is this delivered, especially in administrative functions? because those are where there's a lot of conversation going on and very little value, in my very humble opinion, being produced.
Any advice if you don't have control over your org chart?
So I think it's planting seeds and then being patient internally with the progress that is slow. Or there's several strategies of getting an ally who also sees that understanding. But once like Chris talks about the flywheel, once you see that and start seeing it, and it just really creates momentum in the org.
And Peter, I think when you don't have control, we know we don't have control over the org chart, right? It's matrixing. So specifically for healthcare IT adoption, it's matrixing. What we have done and what I've driven is matrix quality with informatics.
I'll give you a hot take. I'm the CFO. There's no such thing as evaluations for solutions that are longer than 3 months, or you lose the budget. Still accountable for the decision. And I would say, hey, get faster to 2 and put them in. These 170-page RFPs, or are you going to do a 6-week actual engagement where you let people compare different pieces? Like, so example of one where that is not the way decision-making works in almost any category right now. Like, we've all seen kind of the RFP kind of turn into the 6 and 12-month committee-based decision-making piece. It's an example of you'll still make mistakes, but you'll make different kinds of mistakes. Yeah.
Coming back to Megan's, it's really interesting because Narinder, I saw you share something recently about how the CEO really needs to be driving a lot of what the AI strategy is, and how much it needs to be tied to the business. And what Megan just shared there about the org chart, obviously, like, this is probably a group of people who don't have complete autonomy to just go, we're changing our org chart. But if we think about it, like, has everyone seen one chart that hasn't been showed, but I think a lot of people will recognize this. There's this chart of the growth of, like, the number of clinicians over the last 50 years,
Yes.
and the growth of the number of hospital administrators.
Absolutely.
And then, so it's, and it's like, if you haven't seen it, it's just massive, right? It's like the growth of it's administrative, right? And a lot of those were designed in an org chart for the paper charting world that you're talking about. And so if we're talking about redesigning the processes, we have to go all the way back to like what you just said, which
Yes.
is like, why are we even in these groups that we're in right now? Does that make sense in the future state?
Yeah.
I do think,
We don't really probably have to wait.
I think, Chris, the stakes of technology decision-making in every industry is higher than it's ever been, because you used to pick the number 2 solution and it was 10, 20% worse. Honestly, who cares? But if it can be 1,000% worse or 1,000% better, it's a pretty dramatic change. And just pick something outside of healthcare like customer support. You have 3,000 agents. There's a huge difference between going to 1,000 and going to 30, right? And so I think when the stakes are that high, it's an interesting piece of like, how does an industry reorient itself to make decision-making that affects the fundamental element? Like the internet changed Blockbuster and Netflix. Hospitals and healthcare have never had to deal with that kind of level of technology change. And guess what? Now every industry is. It's not unique to healthcare, but it's not a track record or a muscle we've built up in this industry yet. I want to go to hot takes. Not that we have had a now. So we started off here with the patient and the money, you know, your future orientation. Chris put that thing up from Becker's. It was actually from Becker's reported on it, but it was from a leading analyst. And I think my comment was, what an utterly disappointing list, right?
Yeah.
And I think, and so I think the point is like, how do you not become utterly disappointing? And so I would encourage us to go like, I want something that you think you believe about the future that you could be wrong on, right? So we like try to push the edginess.
Can I tell you what I'm worried about? Okay.
Sure, but
All
turn
right.
it into a hot take though.
Okay,
Like,
okay,
like,
hot take.
they're getting a little sleepy. We need to get a little.
That similar to that, the end user, similar to banks and how they're running risk scores on the back end. You don't know what's happening back there. You see the output of it. You don't have visibility into it. That this could either go that way with healthcare. There's decisions being made, claims are getting denied for reasons you don't know, and then it's extra work for the end users, both clinical and patients. Or there is full transparency and things move faster and we're able to think and plan and do at a much higher level than we ever have been.
Yeah, I spoke to this at the beginning of the conversation, is that all those bullet points, very disappointing. We're starting the conversation again with, you know, billing and efficiencies, and we really need to quickly move the conversation to quality and safety. And these are low-hanging fruit. So my hot take for everyone is when you're going into that healthcare facility, speak to the problem that a clinician is having. Speak to the problem of where can we improve patient quality and safety, not only from a QA perspective, but a PI perspective as well.
I think another translation of that might be like, how do you turn into a risk-bearing entity, even if you're fee-for-service today? Is this the thing that unlocks value-based service?
Yeah, I do have a concern also, and it's that the status quo will win. That technology will not be powerful enough it will not be convincing enough. So it is very good, but to be honest, it's not there yet. We still need those scaling curves to hold, and we're building in anticipation of the next models being that much better. If they don't get there, the technology will not ultimately be convincingly good enough. It's very good right now, but it's still not that shocker or wow moment.
I think as humans, we're not good at finding black swan events, right, or thinking about them. And so I think there's a notion of like having these outcomes that are different and then collecting evidence along the way. Like I'll give you one. I don't know if I fully, 55% I believe this. Epic will be less important in 2035 than it is today. Now, you can say, how is that possible? They're replacing Cerner everywhere. They're kind of emerging. But there's another world that what we've seen in other industries is it's turned into a database. Like SAP is a database. Innovation is occurring out of it, and eventually we discover that we like the kind of collective data in one place, but the constraint on rate of innovation is such a tax that we can't afford it anymore, right? Could be wrong, could be true, but if you're a health system planning, what are evidence points that you're looking for to experiment and test the theories of, hey, we went through this and we benefited from the integration of the EHR and it led to this, and we did this outside of the EHR and it led to this, and building that muscle memory of where situations, which mechanisms apply to. Oh, sorry, go.
No, Rod and I were speaking about this last night in regards to TEFCA. I think there's going to be a paradigm shift happening with the implementation of TEFCA, and I'm so looking forward to seeing what the next 1 year to 5 years holds out with TEFCA.
I want to open, but Rod, you can say what you want, but you have to also add a hot take.
It actually goes to the same thing, which is, I hope that the data will no longer be the province of an entity. We talked about this in medication reconciliation. The correct medication list is one which is drawn from all of the appropriate databases that is validated by the patient and the clinician at that point in time. And as soon as they leave the organization's medication list is inaccurate because other things may have happened to it. So my hope, maybe wrong, is that the data will no longer be the province of each organization. It will be the province. I'm not saying the patient will be responsible or own physically the data. We saw what happened when Microsoft tried to do it with PHRs. But the hope is that each organization, each visit is simply a moment in time. But that database is just contributing to that larger picture, which sort of goes to Epic will be a database that will be, in addition to, maybe you went to ECSD and you used Epic, but then you went to Keck a couple weeks later and you were on Cerner. It doesn't matter. They're all sort of moving to that center.
You should use the next Epic module because it's the best module, not because it has a lock on data, right?
Here's a related hot take.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I think we do need a disruptor, and that disruptor might be government. If, in the same sense that all of your IRS, all of your bank transactions are automatically reported to IRS, maybe we do need to deprivatize or nationalize something like an Epic. So then you do, the healthcare data, nobody will part with it willingly, short of that.
Thank you.
And it's maybe more, just a comment. I mean, we focus so much on what we're doing in the United States.
That's a great question.
We can look to other countries with socialized medicine, and there's access to data, patient data, that would be beneficial to building models, building diversity models. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that, and if you're seeing any movement in that direction?
I mean, every academic researcher starts with the Swedish data set, right? Like it's like the one they all go to. I think it's a question of, do we have all the data, right? Because we have a lot of data, But I think, so in the context of where we have data, maybe Sweden will become the AI superpower, or maybe there's data that we're missing around that. But I think especially on health outcomes outside of the healthcare system, I do think there's leadership in other data sets that, one of our academic advisors, a guy named Ziad Obermeyer, who's a super famous professor at Berkeley, and does a lot of the stuff on the Sweden piece because he's got the tax forms and the healthcare data, so you can really understand the long-term impact at a national level of better and worse healthcare. So I do think there's some lessons to be learned, that there could be leadership from other places that might be part of the answer. So.
UK Biobank is a brilliant example of this, and DeepMind has been able to tap into it and build predictive models, and that no one else can do. So when you have that close collaboration between the researchers and the actual source of data, where it is, that's a socialized healthcare example. I think we don't need a single healthcare provider or payer. Following the bank transactions example, if all healthcare transactions are automatically reported, just as all of your interest statements are reported to IRS, that would get you there. The banks are still private entities.
We've got a couple minutes left. I'll let the panelists all get a kind of last word, and we'll kind of wrap up and transition this to lunch.
This has been a great discussion. I don't have any more last words, but thank you for having me.
Speed, 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 speed.
Safety. And to the government point, right? We currently, bank transactions, the government mandates any CMS hospital, so that's 3,700, report their SSIs, their hospital-acquired, the hacks, to NHSN, which is controlled by the CDC. They run statistical modeling on it, compares every facility in the nation against each other, and that's where we rank ourselves against. The ability to download that data is CSV files. And so we have a long, long way to go. We may be talking about ChatGPT starting, November, but we still have a very long way to go. So not only speed, but a focus on speed overlying safety.
Well, great. Thank you guys for the panel discussion and the audience participation, and thanks for Hakoda and Chris for arranging this. Move faster, break things, but don't break the wrong things.
Do no harm.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Chris. I realized at the end of this session, or during that panel, which was awesome, Narinder, thank you for always making it lively, is that I probably should have used a GPT or something to summarize, given my job is pretty complex to sit here and summarize and bring together all this amazing conversation and thought and presentations from a really set of brilliant people. But I thought, my advantage is I'm able to work emotionally, and while I have that advantage for the next couple of weeks, I'll exercise that and keep that ahead of any GPT. What it all boiled down to me, though, if I really reflect on the last 2 days, is that healthcare is in an incredibly unique position. And I see 3 things in it that define that for me. One is there's an incredibly rich opportunity set. Incredibly rich. Rod covered a lot of it. Yesterday, we saw some examples. That includes both low-hanging fruit, but pretty significant changes. So the first defining character of healthcare that I think makes it unique and also very compelling for data and AI is that opportunity set. That's something you would want to look for. The second one is less exciting, or maybe just as exciting, but less happy. There's just not a lot of alternatives. We saw both in Rod's presentation and in Narinder's examples of that we're not really as good at healthcare as we tell everybody in the world that we are. And second, that Narinder's point that healthcare is not going to be able to absorb the aging population. The economic arc of the industry is not good. Now, if we do nothing, we kind of can all see how it'll come crumbling to an end, but that creates a really compelling alternative for us to evaluate how can we change what we're doing. So number one is you got an incredibly rich set of opportunities. Number two is there's not a lot of alternatives. You've got to do something. The third one, though, gets a bit of that emotional side that really comes through in every conversation, is that there's an amazing potential to have an incredible human impact. If you talk to anyone in this room, and Megan, thank you for sharing a story that I had not heard, they're going to have a story like Megan's or Narinder's or everyone in this room about interacting with our healthcare system, and everyone sees incredible opportunity. The problem is it's not happening fast enough, which is to that last panel discussion ending in speed, speed, speed. I think that's a great call to action. So those are the three things that I see that put us in a unique position. Rich opportunity set, not a lot of alternatives, we have to change, and then the potential for human impact. What else came across for me is that there is a vast, confusing, complicating set of solutions in the marketplace. So everyone's being presented from when Chris opened us up with the landscape of everything that exists in the modern data stack to the conversations and the discussions we've had. It's overwhelming. And that overwhelming can kind of choke the system and slow things down and create analysis paralysis and create pilotitis, which is a term I love, Dr. Bonsall. Mickey, that was awesome. So that is something that we're all facing as we look at our alternatives. I also take away that we need clinical outcomes attached to everything. Really, it's a point Rod made this morning. And I think the reason I put those 2 points together is the clinical outcomes create context that help us make decisions based on all those solutions that present to us. So if you just stare at the solutions and you look for nails for your hammer, you're going to do a lot of things. You're going to create a lot of pilots. But if you focus on the outcomes, maybe it's safety, that's really going to give you focus. What is my set I'm evaluating? What are the potential solutions? What pilots do I prioritize? And do I run through them very quickly, as Narinder suggested for his hot take from the CFO? There's a couple of call to actions. While all good, there's a few that stood out to me that resonated through all our themes. And the first one was on the healthcare side, move faster. Right, really, that resonated constantly through this last panel. On the technology side, engaged clinicians. Right, that we talked a lot about failures in experience design. One of them, Mickey's experience this morning, which is really alerts and bearing a code alert and a bunch of other alerts is an experience design issue that engaging the clinicians, engaging the nurses would have uncovered that. Now it's uncovered it, probably not at the best time. So experience design and engaging in the field is important. And I'll always take that advice from Narinder, wrap your vegetables. Rod, this morning you mentioned that tech will always start to look alike, that the people are the difference. And I really think that's where the outcome of these 2 days is for me. That includes those clinicians for design and adoption, that we have to really think about how is this going to make an impact, it's got to be adopted and it has to have good design. But it segues into the other part of people that I think is really important that the last panel came up with, and that's really about leadership. Leadership that can coalesce that vision, define a plan, and move an organization. So that brings us back to the top, right? We have a rich set of opportunities. We don't have a lot of options. We have to change and evolve. And we have an incredible opportunity for impact. But the two constituents, the two sets of humans that are going to help solve this are the clinicians that know how it gets implemented and adopted, and then the leaders that can pull together and make sense out of the complexity, the vast set of solutions that we potentially have, and can move and drive an organization, which I love when we got to the conversation of the org chart. Technology moves much faster than org charts, and org charts should always serve the strategy that you're set out, and that strategy probably evolves in 2 years, maybe 1 year, maybe in 3 years. And if you haven't updated, what are you doing? You're carrying on legacy. It builds up politics. It builds up turf. It slows things down. And so I love that that was interjected into that last panel. So the two sets of people, when Rod says technology will all look alike, the difference is really about the people. I really think it's those two sets. Who's in the field using and engaging this, and who are the leaders that can coalesce the vision to move an organization? In wrap, we're all in this journey together, so we really appreciate the time you guys spending 2 days with us. It means a lot. I think the community you guys have developed just in this short period of time is outstanding. I'm really sorry I missed the cereal conversation. I'm really interested in what cereal you would expect me to eat, even though I don't eat cereal. But I really enjoyed that. So in carrying this on so that it doesn't have to end today, Each of you will receive an invitation to a private LinkedIn community where we will continue the conversation, continue to enable those connections, even though I also encourage you to have many direct connections and build your community that helps you make decisions and move forward and execute. And then you're also going to receive some opportunities to participate in additional thought leadership through Hakoda and our partnerships with Snowflake and AWS and Hex. We want to continue the discussion and drive this industry forward based on those three things I started on the top. We want to address those rich opportunity sets. We want to find a pathway, an alternative for healthcare from the government, from the organizations, for the patients. And we want to do that together, but in order to create an incredible human impact. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris for some final logistics. But again, thank you. I appreciate it.
Great job. All right, everyone. So I'll just echo what Eric said. Thank you very much. We know you guys are very busy people. You guys taking the time, and I think it was, hopefully it was as valuable to you as it was to us. It was great to see the audience interaction. We appreciate it so much. It was heartwarming to see all the interactions that are happening, as Eric mentioned, with personal direct connections. So we look forward to continuing the conversation. But thank you for being with us.